Good evening and welcome. Tonight is Monday, July 8th, 2019. It is 7 o'clock p.m. This is the regular City Council meeting for the City of St. Peter. We'll call the meeting to order. Would all please join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Everyone should have a copy of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All in favor of the agenda as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Next, we have the minutes from our, what's the date on that meeting, Barb? Sorry. Our June 25th meeting. Those minutes appear on pages 4 through 6. Are there any changes or corrections to those minutes? If not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All in favor of the minutes as written, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those minutes are approved. Next, we'll address visitors. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any agenda item? Seeing no one, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any matter whatsoever? Seeing no one, we will move to the consent agenda. The consent agenda begins in detail on page 7 and concludes with the resolution on page 19. It includes the following: a renewal for tree worker license to Quality Tree Service for July 9th, 2019 to April 30th, 2020, plus the regular schedule of disbursements for June 20th, 2019 through July 3rd, 2019. Are there any questions, comments on the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion for approval?
Make a motion to approve. Second.
Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Grant.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Garland.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Vaughn.
Aye.
Consent agenda is approved. Next, we have unfinished business, which there is none, so we move to new business. And the first thing up tonight is the 2018 audit presentation. And Sally and Mr. Jim are here tonight. Jim, over the years, we've gotten to know you, but if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great.
There you go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mayor, members of council, members of administration, my name is Jim Eichten. I'm with MMKR CPAs, the auditor for the city, here this evening to provide a presentation on this year's audit, which is for the year ended December 31st, 2018. I also provided a PowerPoint this evening that will hopefully summarize the results of the audit. So I think Todd's going to help me.
Just go beep now.
If you go twice, it'll
Go faster?
Go faster.
Okay.
A little quick hit.
Okay.
Anyway, the first part of the presentation really covers the purpose of the auditor. It is a requirement in state statutes that the city prepare an annual financial report. That annual financial report has been completed and submitted to the Office of the State Auditor. The auditor's role is to provide an opinion on that financial statement, as well as provide any other opinions that are required to be prepared as part of an audit process. We are then required, as a result, through audit standards, to test your internal controls over specifically to financial reporting. Also your internal controls over your compliance with laws and regulations, again, that relate to financial reporting. Typically, those would be things related to grants or aid that you're receiving through other agencies. We're also then to test your compliance with Minnesota-specific laws and regulations. The State Auditor's Office issues a list of state laws that we test. We don't test every law, just the laws that are provided on that list. And the list does change, which actually became relevant this year as we get into the next slide. We're also, it's okay. We also will be required to complete what's called a single audit of federal awards. If the city were to receive more than $750,000 of federal revenues, you would be required to complete an audit of your compliance with which was called uniform guidance, which is the federal standards for audits. The city did not have that level of revenue, so we didn't complete that this year, albeit we did last year. So it does come and go depending on the nature of the audit. So as part of this audit, I did also then issue what's called the management report, and in that management report, we do summarize the audit from the auditor's perspective, so that if you were, as a reader of the financials or reader of my management report, you get a sense for how the audit went without actually me presenting it. I am here to present it because it's important that we provide the results to the governing body as well as to the public and any other constituents. So in that financial report, we do provide the audit results for the year, and they are summarized as well up here. The first and foremost, we did issue what's called an unmodified or clean opinion on most of the city's financial statements. The unmodified report was the report you were looking for going into this particular audit. We did provide a modified opinion on one component of the city's financial statement, and that related to the city's reporting of the financial activities of the St. Peter Fire Relief Association. So starting last year, the city was required to follow an additional governmental accounting standard, statement GASB 68 on pensions. When that statement came out, the Office of the State Auditor issued a ruling or issued a memorandum of understanding that the Fire Relief Association was not required to follow GASB 68 as part of their financial reporting. In looking at that memorandum, that required then that the city not be able to report under GASB 68 because the information that you need to prepare your financial information would not be available to you because it wasn't in the city's the Fire Relief's financial statements. It was our understanding, or maybe my understanding, or the global auditing community's understanding that that would be okay, that you could not follow GASB 68 because it wasn't readily available. Well, subsequent to last year, the auditor's office came up with a memorandum of understanding that says, no, the city does have to comply with GASB 68 under that ruling, and even though the fire relief might not be. So moving forward, after this year's financial statement, the city has made an initiative or corrective action plan to get the information or provide the information to the fire relief or have the fire relief comply with that standard so that the city can. To summarize really in simple terms, the fire relief is now going to be required to have 2 actuarial studies. Right now they have an actuarial study that develops a funding plan, how well they would fund their plan based on state statutes, which does not comply with the GASB standard. They would then have a separate actuarial report which would be provided using GASB 68 mathematical calculations or actuarial calculations. The challenge there is obviously there's additional cost. And that's where the challenge comes in, and certainly there's a plan in place for dealing with that particular aspect. So what does that mean to the city overall? Really nothing for this year. There isn't a modification in your opinion, but as we look forward, the focus should be on, we're going to correct that for next year. So moving forward on that, on the findings, we do provide, as I mentioned, the opinion on internal controls. It is an opinion that provides an awareness of segregation of duties in the city's finance office. That really, in my opinion, is a reportable item. When we go through this particular audit, we understand that the city's financial staff is not perfectly segregated from the standpoint of the internal controls by the book. So we start our audit under that assumption and really look for what we call compensating controls. And we believe, as part of our opinion, that the city has adequate controls in place as it relates to your internal controls under the understanding you don't have perfectly segregation of duties. Under that same category, we did provide an opinion that is actually a follow-up from last year's audit. When we completed the audit of the federal awards last year, we provided a finding that talks about the city's required to have written accounting procedures over specific areas within the uniform guidance, the federal single audit standards. That particular finding did carry over to this year, even though we did not have a single audit, we are required to follow up on prior year findings, and the lack of that particular document not being placed continues to be a finding. Sally has, and with working with us, developed a corrective action plan again in that case, and we anticipate as we get to next year's audit that particular finding will be eliminated. Moving on to the findings, I mentioned the Minnesota legal compliance findings that we talked about, or audit standards that we talked about. The first bullet point, the first finding that we had this year in the Minnesota legal compliance area relates to the fire relief payment. So it is a requirement in law that when the city receives the state aid related to the fire relief, that particular state aid, those dollars that come to the city that are required to be forwarded on to the fire relief to fund their pension plan, is required to be forwarded to them within 30 days. That particular 30-day statute is in law, and that particular 30-day requirement was not met. The city did provide the resources to the fire relief, but not within the 30-day time period. This particular law, or finding, if you will, from the city, is in over half, if not 70%, of the audits that we issued this year. We're anticipating, obviously, that the state has found this to be an area of non-compliance statewide and put it in the list of laws that we were required to test this year as a result. So again, there is a corrective action plan in place, and certainly with the knowledge of that 30-day, that will be something that the city looks for.
Jim, if I can,
Yeah,
if I
absolutely.
recall properly, the finding was 34 days, or?
Right. Yeah, so you were close.
Yeah, so it's not like we were hanging on to it for months and months and
Yeah.
months. It was 34 days.
And even just go back to prior audit, not here at the city, but any compliance in this area, there is a requirement that you pay your obligations within 30 days. And that's a pretty swift turnaround for any obligation that you have. Most cities process potentially once a month, every other month. So invoices come in, and they typically process in 30 days. So to get that payment off in 30 days is pretty swift. So it is something you have to be almost aware of or looking for, rather than just waiting for an invoice to come in. It doesn't really come in the form of an invoice, to be honest. It would just hit your bank account, and oh, there it is. It's forwarded on. So something we've seen in most of our audits, as I mentioned. So then lastly, it is a requirement in state law that the city provide an annual delegation of an individual within the city that is allowed to make electronics fund transfers. That particular delegation is an annual delegation that typically takes place, and it's a delegation that did not take place for this past year. Corrective action, again, is to probably have that part of the organizational minute or the organizational meeting and delegate that particular item. I think you already made that delegation. It's probably come to you already.
We've gone to the bank with the certified copies, so
Right.
we're good
Yes.
for this year.
For this year.
And we'll put it in the
Right.
January
Mhm.
packet.
So, albeit a number of findings that we had this year, it did provide some context to all of those. I see, and I've said this at every audit that I talk to in front of the city council, it is a learning experience. We are here to learn something and provide more better results or better observations for the city. What I would focus on as the council is the corrective action plan. That is the plan in place by administration to correct these findings, and hopefully when we get here to next year, we don't have similar findings. So before I move on, any other questions in that area? Seeing none, I'll move forward. So in my management report, as I mentioned, we do provide other information. It is a couple items I want to point out. We do provide in your financial report responsibility for 2 component units. The component units of the city include the Rivers Edge Hospital and Clinic, as well as the Housing Redevelopment Authority. Both of those organizations issue and have separate audit reports, but based on their standing with the city, in the oversight you provide, we are required to roll them into the city's financial report. We don't take full responsibility for those, but we do provide information in your financial report, but they are audited separately. It's also important to note that the timing of the audit is required to be submitted by June 30th to the Office of the State Auditor, as well as any other agencies that are required to submit, and that did all take place on a timely basis this particular year. But overall, the last bullet point is also important to note. We did not have any difficulties in performing the audit, and it all went very smoothly as it has in the past. So the second part of the audit really provides information on your financial picture as well as your financial results for the year. My management report starts with some information on property taxes. I start in a place here specifically to the trends in market values. You can see by this particular presentation, market values have increased for the past 6 years, roughly. Since the downturn in the economy back in 2009, 2010, we've seen increases since 2013. This particular graph, as a comparison to other cities and other organizations that we audit, is very similar in terms of its high point. Most cities are, for the first time, exceeding the market value that was at the high point back in 2008, 2009. And you can see that that was pretty much where you're at for the city of St. Peter. So you're very similar to other cities in the state in that regard. We do provide information on tax rates. This particular presentation shows average tax rates. The average tax rates were very minimal, showed a very minimal increase for the city in 2018, as well as the total overall after seeing a little bit bigger increases the year before. So what that means to the city, you can go to the next one, thank you, is it starts with this particular graph. We do provide information on your overall governmental fund revenues on a per capita basis. So you can see even with the increasing property tax rates, given the makeup of the city's property taxes generated on a per capita basis is significantly lower than the statewide averages. Most of that relates to the type of property the city has, some of which is non-taxable. Maybe some, if not more, than average. So the city does rely on intergovernmental revenues, state aid, to finance its overall operation. You can see in total the city's revenues per capita was $872 per individual. When you look at other cities statewide, they're generating about $1,000 in revenue per capita. So you are less than the average city, mostly to do with the property tax category. In 2018, the city did experience some increases in a couple areas that are noteworthy. Both licenses and permits and charges for services increased specific to development activity in the city. We are experiencing or seeing that in most of our clients this year as the economy is going real well. And most cities are experiencing increases in that area. So the next graph actually then shows expenditures per capita. I tend to focus here on the current costs, which really are just annual operating costs of the city. The city's spending per capita on an annual current basis was about $680 per resident, which is almost identical to the comparable statewide. Statewide, that number is $682 per resident. So your city is very similar when it comes to spending on the services provided in governmental funds, which include public safety, street maintenance, parks, those types of items. You can also see there that the city's debt service spending in its governmental funds was about $142 per resident. On average, a city your size in the state spends about $182, which does reflect good fiscal management in the governmental funds from a debt service perspective. So we also provide information then on the general fund or the overall governmental funds. This particular graph shows the increases in the governmental funds The general fund increased about $680,000 after a combination of revenues exceeding projections as well as expenditures being less than projections. A perfect result when it comes to the financial operations of the city. We do also report some additional fund balance increases in some of the capital project funds as well as a cumulative of really all the other funds of the city. A significant noteworthy item in this particular regard is the city did report a change in a fund balance specific to the accounting for land held for resale. The city is reporting that now as a balance sheet item or as an asset, when in the past those resales were reported as expenditures immediately, and then as they were sold, they were reported as revenues. We're now accounting for them as assets on the balance sheet, which is reflected in the increase here. We also provide information on the financial position of the general fund. The general fund's financial position this year obviously increased, as I briefly mentioned. The city does have a policy that establishes that the city will strive to maintain a fund balance in the range of 35% to 50% of subsequent year's expenditures. The purpose for that policy really is that the city is receiving revenues on a really only a twice-a-year basis when it comes to property taxes. So the need for a fund balance is very important, given that you're going to have to spend 6 months not getting any more property tax receipts. The end of fiscal 2018, that particular percentage was 51%. So you're slightly above the fund balance range, but certainly in a good position when it comes to equity or financial position in your general fund. I did mention the city's revenues were above budget. This is actually a 5-year trend, but I did want to point out that revenues were exceeded budgeted amounts by almost $500,000, specifically in a number of areas related to the economy. Property tax collections were above budget. Plan checking fees were also above budget, and some of the licenses and permits, which did show some very good trend lines. On the expense side of the equation, we're seeing that expenditures were less than budget by about $300,000, which, given a $7.3 million operation, is very close to what you would expect. One category that stood out to us was even the street improvement area was less than what you would have budgeted, but probably mostly related to the timing of projects in that area would cause that to happen. So I'm going to move to the other significant funds of the city. The city does have a number of enterprise funds. You can see on the next graph the financial results of those funds. Overall, collectively, those funds did increase fund balance by about $1.1 million. A large chunk of that was in the long-term care facility fund, as the city did, I don't know if the right word is sell, that particular, sell is a good word, okay? That particular facility, which did cause a gain on sale. You can see there the deficit that was in place in that fund was eliminated, and there was a gain on sales, mostly because of the depreciation that had been reported on that facility over the past several years. Overall, you can see the other funds, most are having increases in fund balance, and those that are not are a small portion of the overall total, but in most cases are cash flowing or having positive cash flow, which is very good. My management report does also provide information on the individual funds, some trend lines. I think these are the ones I pointed out in my report. Specifically, the electric fund did see some increases in revenues, about 5.3%, which is mostly due to the increases in the rates as well as the usage in that fund. The next one shows the water fund. The water fund operation reflected about a $200,000 increase in fund balance. And you can see here, however, the water fund sales did decline, specifically related to decrease in overall consumption in that particular fund. And then lastly, we do show the wastewater fund, which is important given the size of debt that exists in this particular fund. The green line does show a significant increase very significant income before transfers, almost $1 million this past year. So we also then do provide, lastly, some information on overall outstanding debt on a per capita basis within the city and compare that to some of the statewide averages. The first graph does provide information on the governmental activities. I did mention earlier in the governmental activities, the overall debt load is below some of the statewide averages, which is also supported here. You can see that the debt per capita is roughly $780 per resident. Statewide, that particular comparable number is about $1,700, $1,600 for 2017, so it's significant below averages. The next graph does counter that when you look at the enterprise funds, given some of the improvements that were put in place, probably not recently, but over the last several years. The water fund as well as the wastewater fund does have significant debt, as well as the electric fund. You can see the comparables there. In total, the debt in the enterprise funds is about $2,400 per resident, when statewide it's about $870. The city does do an excellent job of projecting out the debt service and aligning that with future revenue sources, and the city does anticipate that those obligations will not be a concern financially, but it is a perspective you want to take from this graph, that there are significant debt in place. So I think that's the last graph I'm going to cover. We do provide also information on other accounting and auditing issues. This past year, the city did implement one GASB 78 on OPEB, which did not have a significant impact. So I didn't even point it out earlier, but we do implement all new standards as they come forward. So in summary, the last one more. There we go. I did provide a clean opinion on the basic financial statements with the one qualification on the fire relief. Provided 2 internal control findings specifically, as well as 2 Minnesota legal compliance findings. We did find that the city's financial results were indicated in adherence to the overall budget that's being provided, which is important given the control aspects of that on the board's perspective. And we also continue to find the financial results continue to be assessed very diligently on the part of city staff. There's very few questions that I ask that are not immediately understood or provided a long-term perspective of, well, that's what's going to happen down the road. I continue to see an ongoing assessment of the future progress in city overall financial management, which is a plus. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you might have for me.
Anyone? Steve?
Is there a threshold where cities, municipalities are not required to have an annual audit because of size or dollar volume?
It is a dollar volume number. It's about 750,000.
Okay. So that pretty much encompasses most cities.
Most cities, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And when you send this report off to the state, what do they do with it?
Well, they read it.
Yeah.
You might often wonder, I often wonder, do they actually read it? It's a big state, and they have to read, but they do read each one of these reports. I'd say it's rare that we get letters from the Office of the State Auditor, but we do. I'd say once every 5 years they come in and audit us and look at what we're doing. This year is one indication. We did receive a letter regarding the GASB 68 issue from the Office of the State Auditor, so that is certainly an indication that they're reading these reports.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Looked pretty clean to me. Thank you, Jim. Todd, did you have anything to
If I could, for folks that might be interested in reading or seeing more, certainly we'll have some more information in upcoming hot sheets, but in a week or so, the report and the financial statements will be on our website. And so you'll be able to take a look at it. We also provide copies of them for you to, you can't take them out of the building, but to look at the library. So if you don't want to look at it on the computer, you can go down and see the actual paper versions at the library and take them to a desk and check them out, and if you have questions, give us a call.
Okay. Sally, did you have to add anything more tonight, or?
No, that's it, except the resolution approving is on page 21.
All right. Any other questions before we ask for a motion? If not, the resolution accepting the 2018 financial statements together with independent auditor's report appears on page 21. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Now any questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Conley.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Once again, thank you, Jim.
Jim.
Sally, for all the good work.
Good job, Sally.
Next up, we have a mortgage subordination for JAEL Properties for the River Valley Birth Center. And Russ is here, and I see the...
Yeah, Mayor, members of the City Council, in 2014, JAEL Properties LLC was formed by Erica and Joe Urban to own the real estate at the corner of Park Row and Washington, where the birth center is. They also wholly own the River Valley Birth Center. Erica's been a midwife since 2009, and in 2014, it was her dream to open up a birth center, and I can say we were successful in those efforts. The birth center is licensed by the state of Minnesota and accredited by the Commission for the Accreditation of Birth Centers. The center originally opened with startup cost of $240,821. Of that amount, Pioneer Bank provided $150,000, a $135,000 loan, and then a $15,000 line of credit. The city, through the EDA, provided a loan in the amount of $65,008. And then the Urbans were able to contribute $25,813 as cash into the project, and again, for a total of $240,871. The EDA's note is secured by a promissory note, a personal guarantee executed by the Urbans, as well as then a mortgage, which has been recorded in a second position, subordinate to the current mortgage of Pioneer Bank. The note is amortized on a 20-year schedule, but due and payable after the 10th year in July of 2014. And at this time, the balance of the note has been paid down to $52,437. At this time, the Urbans are seeking to refinance their Pioneer Bank note to provide some cash to provide for roof repairs, porch repairs, and some other miscellaneous repairs to the Park Row property. Pioneer Bank has agreed to provide additional financing to, in the amount of $136,200, and you'll note that is $1,200 more than their current mortgage of $135,000. The bank, to determine value of the property, did an internal evaluation, and based on the 5 comparables, they came up with a value of $193,000. The county has a taxable value for tax purposes of $199,000. If the note were to be approved, or the subordination, there would be a total of $201,208 in mortgages filed against the property, which would exceed the value of the property. However, the EDA's exposure is no longer $65,008, it's $52,437. So a total subject to the mortgage would be $188,637. The personal financials of the Urbans, the financials of the River Valley Birth Center, as well as that of JAEL LLC, were reviewed by myself, Mike Favor from the EDA, and Corey Abels from the EDA as the subcommittee. We all had no reservations that the note would be honored and the debt would be considered to be a good debt. The city attorneys had reviewed the subordination agreement provided by Pioneer Bank and has approved that as to form. And the EDA then, at their last meeting, have unanimously recommended that you provide for the subordination as requested by the Urbans and Pioneer Bank. And Mr. Mayor, I'd answer any questions you or members might have.
All right, questions? Russ, do you have handy, because I think, I know I was very interested when I heard some numbers last week whenever you were talking.
The numbers of births.
Yeah, can you
Yep.
provide that for us so we know?
Yeah, I actually wrote it down here. I forgot to read it.
Okay.
So far, since they've opened at the birth center, they've had 232 births provided at the center, and then another 86 births that have been provided off-site at the home of the mother, for a total of 318. And Erica has said those are kind of heavily loaded on the last couple years as they got the processes and insurance processes all in place. So it's doing very, very well, providing a very valuable service. It is the only freestanding birth center south of the Twin Cities area. So it's providing very valuable service, as well as the opportunity to train other midwives and doulas that would participate in the birthing. So they're kind of lively out there, and if you notice, if they have a young lady born, they put a pink flag out, and if they have a little boy born, they'll put a blue flag out. So kind of the neighborhood can kind of keep score on their own.
What if there's twins?
I don't know if they have two flags.
Never mind. Yes, it looks like, I haven't heard anything from any of the neighbors. It looks like they're very good neighbors, and everything is going fine, as far as that is
Yeah.
concerned.
Yeah, the operation is subject to a conditional use permit issued by the Board of Zoning Appeals, and they've had no violations, or there's been no issues at all.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, the resolution approving subordination of the city's mortgage securing revolving loan made to JAEL Properties, LLC, to a new $136,200 mortgage proposed by Pioneer Bank appears on page 24. Is there a motion for approval?
So move. Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Ferris,
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin,
Aye.
Mayor Zine.
Aye.
Councilmember Crum,
Aye.
Councilmember Piper,
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Thank you. Next up, we have a school resource officer request, and the chief is here this evening. Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm back.
You're gonna make it a habit.
Thank you, Mayor. Page 25 is a memo concerning what the school district has brought to us seeking a second school resource officer position. Currently, we have one school resource officer, as you all know, and we have discussed quite a bit in both the joint meeting and last week's workshop. So, with the building of the new high school, the school district certainly felt they were in need of a second school resource officer, and so we've been working on this really for probably the last school year until now. It's one of the priorities of the school board this year was school security, as you all know. And really our school resource officers, or officer, will be officers, I'm hoping, that really is their first priority, is to maintain school security services, which really helps keep students and staff safe in the environment of our public schools. So in working through this process, I'm here tonight seeking you to approve the resolution which would allow the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with the school district to fund this position with a 60-40 split. The school district would pay 60% of the salary and benefits, and the city would pay 40%. I can go into what the school resource officer does, or other details that you may wish. One of the things I think, oftentimes it's difficult to really quantify what the school resource officer does. One of our goals there certainly is the prevention of juvenile delinquency. And recently I did a little bit of research on what it means, for instance, to keep kids in school. In other words, what our school resource officer does is often deal with truancy issues, as an example. And some of the information I learned was that that if we can keep kids from dropping out of school for whatever the reason may be, oftentimes it's because of juvenile delinquency or drug or alcohol use. But a school dropout is more likely to be unemployed, have higher rates of public assistance, be single parents, and have children at a much younger age. The other thing I learned is that if you're a high school graduate, they earn $1 million more in his or her lifetime than a person who drops out of high school, which was an amazing number to me. The other thing I learned is in today's job market, if it really requires someone to have at least 12 and a half years of education to earn the median income. So it really is important to prevent delinquency, which is a primary reason kids leave school. And we all know that, I think, intuitively. And that's a priority not only for the school district, but for the police department also. And what ultimately happens is 41% of our prison population do not have a high school diploma. So it's really an important goal. Security has to be the #1 issue for school children and staff, but the prevention of delinquency is extremely important. And that's, I think, a primary goal of not only staff at school, but certainly our school resource officers.
Okay. Any questions for the chief? Go ahead. Sorry, Ed, go ahead.
I got just one question. I know, and I totally agree with this, but I got, with this, all the sporting events, is the resource officer one of them, would they be, or
Yes.
is he now already?
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah, they attend school functions.
So they just kind of switch their hours?
Well, we have one person that does it now.
Okay.
So hopefully, we probably only need one officer at an event.
Yeah.
So it would be one
Okay.
or the other.
That's what I was wondering, if they had presence there too. Thank you.
If I can add, though, just a point of clarification, that doesn't mean that the school resource officer is at every event that takes place at the high school after regular school hours, because oftentimes there's 2, 3, 4 events going on at different venues, and so there's just not a way to be at every one all of the time.
Sure, they may not be at a school play,
Yeah. But
but a major sporting event is an example.
they picked the big ones,
Absolutely, yeah.
basically.
A school dance, right.
Roger?
I was reading here, it says that it's 52,000 including the cost of vehicle and supplies and training?
That's an estimate that my office put together, that I put together. The salary will depend a little bit based on who is assigned to this position. The agreement that we have with the school district allows the chief to provide the assignment, and we have officers that are paid at a different level based on their level of experience with the city. But that does vacillate based on, do we sign a new car? Is there a new car purchased? The assumption here is, frankly, that we're not buying a new car, that we will, in essence, take a car out of the hand-me-down rotation that will be provided to an additional school resource officer.
Okay.
So they have relatively small or minimal value.
Roger, I can't see it from here. Is your microphone on?
Yeah.
Oh, it is?
Yep.
He's got a different style.
He's got a different style.
Yeah, I got the old one.
You're not a conformist.
Also, yeah,
So what we see from a salary and benefits perspective is in the mid-40s is your percentage, or is the dollar amount of your 40%.
right. I wasn't sure about including the equipment, that's why I wanted to clarify.
Yeah. Training, vests, uniform, all those kind of things add up.
Yeah, it does.
Chief, if we approve this tonight, I think the superintendent has already approved, if I'm not mistaken.
The school district has taken
School
action
district
to
has.
approve.
Would you start the process to hire new, or are you promoting from within, or moving
What
from
we
within?
would do is two-pronged approach. Is start the process to determine who would be assigned to that position. At the same time, begin the hiring process. Because honestly, at a good time of year, the hiring process takes us probably 3 months.
Right.
So will they get a school resource officer at the beginning of the school year? Probably not, because we're going to need to backfill that position before we can make the assignment. If that's clear, not clear, it's...
Okay. Steve?
I don't have a question. I just have a couple of comments, Chief. I wish the school board would bring their percent up higher. But, I've given it a lot of thought from our workshop a week ago. And I truly understand where you're coming from, and I truly appreciate your perspective. And I know that this is of great value to our community. So I just wanted to thank you for your perspective and giving me.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I don't disagree with you either.
Okay.
Roger?
I have the same concern. School year, the time is roughly going to be 80% that this officer will be dealing with school, and they're paying at 60%. I would have preferred that, but for the benefits that you've outlined, I'll be supporting it, but I would like to see that as well.
And just as the counterpoint, I agree it would be lovely if the school could contribute more, but at the same time, those students who are attending school are citizens of St. Peter as well, and they don't stop being citizens just because they all happen to be on the same piece of property during the day. So I feel that the city does still have a responsibility to sort of shepherd and chaperone them during that school day, and so I don't think it's unreasonable for us to be putting forth a little more than just the school year equivalent as far as the amount of pay. It benefits the entire community, and it is directly benefiting citizens of St. Peter, so I'm comfortable with the 40-60 split.
And I agree. They are kind of mini cities unto themselves in some ways.
Anyone else? If not, the resolution approving execution of agreement with School District 508 for city provision of one additional school resource officer beginning with the 2019-2020 school year appears on page 27. Is there a motion for approval?
Move the resolution, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Johnson?
Aye.
Councilmember Curley,
Aye.
Mayor Zeman?
Aye.
Councilmember Koenig?
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Pierce?
Aye. Resolution is approved.
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Peters.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks.
All right, next up, we have a community education memorandum of understanding.
Mayor and members, this is one that you see and have seen on an annual basis for at least a decade. Work goes into this process. The agreement here is for the school district to provide $10,200 to the city for provision of programs that were previously, and by previously, I think it was prior to the 2000, I think we have it written in here, 2009, 2010 year. These services are provided through the Recreation Department. This grant funding comes to you again from the school district. The memorandum of understanding outlines the work that goes in and the programs that are provided. One cautionary tale, as I've mentioned to you just about every year, if the dollars don't, or the dollars are reduced, or we can't continue to find efficient ways to provide this, at some point this could mean that you are not accepting these dollars, or you are not providing the programming that's in place. And so it could put the council in the position in the future of canceling programming that frankly wasn't your own or didn't start with you. So I want to provide that cautionary tale. That is not the case for this year. That's not how I view this, nor does your Recreation and Leisure Services Director, Mr. Schugel. The agreement starts on page 30, lasts through page 32, with a resolution providing for approval on page 33. Be happy to answer additional questions that you may have.
Questions? Steve?
Todd, do you remember back in 2004, what was the driver from the legislature?
Yeah, there were substantial cuts that went in place for community ed programming of this type. And so it was a reduction in funding that came to the school district. Because we operate in, and more so at that time, less currently, parallel programming, that we could do it efficiently under the umbrella of the programming that we were providing at that time.
I know this is not your area, but are the dollars that the school district receive, are they particularly earmarked for community ed? And can they use other state aid to supplement community ed?
The dollars that we receive are for community ed. Could they use general fund dollars to fund programming of certain types? I believe that is the case.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? The resolution authorizing execution of Youth Development Memorandum of Understanding appears on page 33. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Any more questions? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Next up, we have a resolution for a fire hall bond reimbursement process. And Sally?
Mayor and council members, starting on page 34, there's a memo outlining us, the city, and for you to approve a resolution to approve reimbursement costs for the fire hall. This is the same as what we did for the pavilion. The IRS has a regulation that we can, as a government, reimburse ourselves. We have to declare that we're going to reimburse ourselves up more than 60 days in advance of the bond issue. So as you all know, we're incurring costs right now for a fire hall, whether it's architecture, land purchase we're doing this week, and some other things that you've already approved. So this resolution is just allowing us to reimburse when we do sell bonds. This does not commit us to constructing a fire hall at this point. It just gives us the option of if it's decided that we're going ahead and building the fire hall, we can reimburse ourselves for costs that are incurred prior to that. So the resolution is on page 35 and 36 for that resolution.
Questions? Roger?
There's no extra fiscal impact to us, right? If I'm reading
No,
that
the
right.
only impact would be is if we would not go ahead and sell bonds, that outlay of cash for the, excuse me, for the land and the rest would just come out of reserves.
Anyone
Excuse
else?
me.
Not the resolution declaring official intent of the city of St. Peter to reimburse certain expenditures from the proceeds of bonds for the city for the fire hall project, appears on page 35 and 36. Is there a motion for approval?
So
Mike?
moved.
Second.
Now any questions, more questions? Call the roll, please.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Carter.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Next up, we have Russ. Thank you, Sally. We have Russ for a REDA agreement modification. REDA
Yep.
being the Regional Economic Development Alliance.
Yep, Mayor and members of the City Council, in 2010, the City of St. Peter joined the Regional Economic Development Alliance, along with Blue Earth County, Nicollet County, the City of Mankato, North Mankato, Lake Crystal, Eagle Lake, and at the time, the City of Le Sueur, the City of Mapleton, and the City of Madison Lake. Region 9 also serves in that organization as an ex officio member and provides us some additional resources. The organization is regulated by a joint service agreement that all of the member entities have joined into, and the intent is to provide for our collective talents as well as our collective resources and to work economic development cooperatively rather than competing unnecessarily amongst ourselves. The agreement is reviewed from time to time, usually on about a 3-year basis. A subcommittee then of the REDA, let me step back. Each of the REDA members has a city representative as well as then a representative from the city council or governing board. I serve as the staff representative, and Councilman Kwame has been on the REDA board representing the city council. So a subcommittee is put aside, typically 4 members, and they do a review and they report back to the full committee. You were represented, and the rest of REDA was represented by Councilman Kwame, who sat on the committee that did the review. There were a couple recommended alterations from that committee. None of them, I would say, are really consequential or large in nature, but more rather bookkeeping and perhaps to bring the rules into kind of conformance with some of the activities that had been taking place. One, it acknowledges the difficulty and the delicate nature of cities recruiting businesses from the other committees, and that is not to happen. But I will note that we recently had a tool and die company that moved here from our partner in Lake Crystal. It was not a recruitment effort. They exhausted all efforts in Lake Crystal to find a suitable building. We had a vacant building that suited their needs, so that was undertaken well within the confines of the agreement. We're just trying to clarify a little bit of that language. It also talks about expanding the services of REDA to provide some perhaps things that they hadn't traditionally been doing, helping out with identifying transportation issues, housing issues, vacant buildings, and perhaps addressing specific issues like childcare. Finally, it talks about the coordination of the ag industry with one of their recent initiatives, the Green Seam Initiative, which is part of Greater Mankato Growth. And then it also clarifies the chair and the vice chair of REDA, who also serve on the Greater Mankato Board of Directors, on who they can be, given that Mankato and North Mankato already have a seat on the Greater Mankato Growth Board of Directors as member cities. It does establish dues at $2.19 per capita based on demographers' estimates. And if you approve, the dues paid in 2020 have been calculated to be $26,593.49, and those would be adjusted annually at the $2.19 based upon the new demographers' estimates. And typically, we've been growing at about 0.8% a year population-wise in this past decade. Mr. Mayor, there is a resolution that's prepared on page 48 and 49 that would contemplate acceptance of the agreement. And of course, I'd answer any questions that you or members of the council may have.
Questions? John, did you have anything to add, since you sat on that board?
I was on the committee 3 years ago, a 3-person committee that rewrote the original one. And one of the things I pushed for was this marketplace enhancements area where they talk about things that Greater Mankato Growth and REDA traditionally do not spend much time on, which are things in the smaller communities, the Main Street transportation, childcare, housing, affordable housing, that sort of thing. My justification was that Mankato and North Mankato have the resources to address these problems on their own. The smaller communities don't always, and they get lost in the shuffle, and they are an important, a critical part of economic development in the smaller communities. And so 3 years ago, it got put in near the end under other services and such. So this time, I volunteered and pushed to get on the committee. There's 4 people on the committee this time, and I got it right up at front. So it's objectives and strategic areas. It's right at the very beginning. Whether that makes a difference, whether REDA and Greater Mankato Growth actually do this in the future, would be wonderful if they do, or if they ignore this, I don't know, but the smaller communities, I think, should be pushing this. And Russ, I'm sure, is pushing this kind of thing, and our representative to the REDA board needs to be pushing this also.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments or questions? Not, the resolution renewing membership and participation in REDA and authorizing execution of joint economic development service agreement appears on pages 48 and 49. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Corman.
Aye.
Member Piper.
Aye.
Member Graham.
Aye.
Member Paris.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Member Carlin.
Aye.
Mayor Ziegler.
Aye. Resolution is approved. Thanks again, Russ. Next up, we have a construction standard detail plate modification. Mr. Moulton.
Mayor Zeman and City Council, as usual, we come to you every so often with standard details that we'd like to either add or update that are in our portfolio. We have about 9 in front of you today. 2 of them relate to streetlights. That's standard details 2002 and 2003. And really what we're doing with the standard details for streetlights is we're changing the bulb brightness in those details to 100-watt LEDs. Those are what we use with the Amoresco project. Their model showed us what we needed to have with that type of light that we have, and so we'd like to have that formally approved. The other 2 are 3022 and 3023. Those relate to home construction and how much permanent stabilization is needed before permanent occupancy is given to the homeowners. Those changes have lessened and what I would call still meet the requirements of the MS4 permit. As you remember previously, we required sod, and this is hydro seeding has become popular and a little more effective now with the type of seed and the methods that are used. And so we're asking for approval on those. The modification is listed on page 50 there. And then I have 5 new ones for you, and these are related to inlet protection devices. They have been approved in our MS4 permit to meet requirements. They are cheaper, they make it easier for the contractor to comply with city standards and help us meet our MS4 permit requirements. And so over the last year, we've done some experimentation with these types of devices and find them to be successful. I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, questions? Susie?
So these curb inlet protection sediment control devices, those are like those kind of orange rolls with the fabric that we see by some of the grates around town?
Right, each one serves a different area depending on the volume that's there
Right.
and the area that's disturbed.
And so whose obligation is it to install those? Is that the contractor, the person doing the work, or do they pay a fee to the city and a city crew installs it?
They are, the contractor is responsible. When they come in with a project, we will look
Okay.
at the area that they're going to disturb and the location to the storm sewer.
Okay,
Sometimes they can do it along the boulevard, or they have to go down to the catch basin.
right.
And so we'll monitor that they're meeting the permit that they filled out.
Oh,
Pete, I was going to ask, and you answered one of them, but what generated these changes? You said something about the
Just to
hydro
improve the
seeding.
efficiency and to make it easier and cheaper for the contractor to meet compliance standards.
So did the contractors come to you, or did you go to the contractors, or did the state?
Little of
or both?
Yep,
Okay.
a little of both. Amy Cam, our stormwater foreman, she takes feedback during our meetings. That if they come up with a new idea or some products new out in the market, then what we'll do is evaluate it for usually about a year to make sure it's meets compliance. Or we go to our neighbor MnDOT and find out what they've used in certain areas, because they're kind of the broader construction people that see a little more of this than we do.
Okay, I'm just curious as to how this starts. Any other questions? The resolution approving the standard detail plates for 9 of them, I think you said, appears on page 61. Is there a motion for approval?
so moved?
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Member Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Mayor Zenas.
Aye.
Councilmember Clement.
Aye.
Resolution is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. That concludes our new business. Next up, we have reports, and I see Todd's got at number 2 on his list, but based on the number of people in the parade route, I would think the 4th of July was a huge success. I've never seen that many people in the 4 years I've been riding in it. So other than that, Todd can maybe give us more details here in a little bit. That's all I've got.
Let me
Sorry.
jump onto that one right away. If anybody has any additional comments, as you know, from a staff perspective, we do talk about issues that we saw, things that we might be able to improve, cooperation with the Chamber of Commerce, who hosts the event and sponsors the event. And so we saw very few problems this year. Mr. Mayor, I'd agree. Busy year, whether it was the biggest or not, it had to be very close if it wasn't, and the weather was very cooperative. There's a few small issues that we try and tweak every year, but I think all in all, went very well. I've not seen numbers or heard specific numbers from the chamber yet. I did place a call to the chamber today to Ed, and frankly, he was out at Minnesota Square Park doing some final cleanup, so he was not available, and he didn't call me back, or at least when I was around, to talk about any specific numbers. So anyway, I think a great event and a good time was had by just about anybody who wanted to have a good time. So we're happy about that, and wonderful fireworks again that evening. Let me go to some of the other reports if I can, just to remind the council that your workshop next Monday will be at the St. Peter Arts Center. So watch for that. As you may recall, about 4 or 5 years ago, we had a joint meeting with their board, and so my intent with Ann He, the director, is to have a joint meeting and talk about some of the art things that you are currently doing cooperatively, some things that might be coming into the future, and to give you some access to some of the cool things that they're doing there. Arts are a significant portion of your community, and something that you've talked about at goal-setting sessions and have talked about as something that enhances community. So watch for that, please. I also want to mention, before I turn it over to the League of Minnesota Cities Conference recap, that MRVT, Minnesota River Valley Transit, has a meeting tomorrow at 2:30 here in this room. So just to alert council members Grams and Carlin, to remind them, and packets are out. If folks have questions, an important meeting tomorrow. Certainly approval of the budget and the grant application to the state and feds are important issues related to MRVT, so those will be on the docket for tomorrow. And then last, number 3 on my list is League of Minnesota Cities Conference recap. You had 3 people from your council and staff that attended. So your finance director attended as a first-time attendee. Great to have Sally go to that and really see what's going on with other cities and get that broader feel and opportunity to exchange information with other cities. So I hope that was worthwhile. Councilmember Grams attended, and I mentioned to him that I'd let him, if he wanted to say a few words about his experience there, whether it was positive or negative, and then I'll be quiet.
I've been waiting all night for this, Steve.
Well, Mr. Mayor, you give me an hour?
Yeah. We won't be here when you're done, but. You'll be
Okay.
right ahead.
All right. Well, I enjoy going to the League of Minnesota Cities. This is the 3rd time that I've attended, and I truly enjoy going. I've just been impressed by all the sessions that are offered. In fact, there were 30 this year. And the problem is trying to decide which ones to go to, and there isn't enough time to go to all of them. But it's everything from community engagement to effective communication, innovation, planning, resource funding, workshop. There's so many interesting seminars to go to, and the morning sessions are really interesting too with the speakers. And discussing council issues with other communities, it's interesting how some that I've talked to were happy to get a vote of 4-3 on most issues, which I found surprising. So it really was a positive statement relative to this council. It really is. And the issues that people run on. And the other thing I found interesting is the level of involvement from cities from all sizes, all the way down to 400 people, to all the way up to the Minneapolis and St. Paul are there. And it's just a mix of people, it really is. So I truly enjoy it, and I would recommend any other council members to attend in the future. It's at St. Paul next year. It's a real educational experience.
Where was it at this year?
At Duluth, yeah.
Well, thank you, Steve, for attending that.
Well, I appreciate the city allowing me to go, so thank you.
Questions of Steve or Sally or Todd on this? Once again, thank you. Does anyone else have, were you done, Todd?
I'm
sorry.
done, sir.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Does anybody else have anything they want to share or add? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned.